At Covenant Baptist Theological Seminary, it is our privilege to partner with local churches both in the United States and around the world in training men for the gospel ministry. If your church supports CBTS with $200 a month and a commitment to pray for us, any student in your church can attend CBTS tuition free. To learn more about how you can partner with us in providing informed scholarship with pastoral heart, visit cbtseminary.org.
The Covenant Podcast exists to equip listeners with theological content from a 1689 Baptist perspective.
We pray you find this resource edifying, faithful to Scripture, and Christ exalting. Now, let's get started. Welcome to the Covenant Podcast. Austin McCormick here with my co-host, Dewey Doval, and today we have multiple interviewees. One of them is Jake Stone, who we've had on multiple times. So if you want to know more about him, I'll invite you to find some of the shows that we've interviewed with him, and you can learn more about him at the beginning of those. But we also have the privilege of having Jordan Stefaniak and Garrett Walden to talk about the John Gill Project. So brothers, before we start talking about the John Gill Project, can you, starting with Jordan, introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. So thanks for having us on. This is a real treat and delight and pleasure, all three of them together mixed. So I'm super excited to be here. I guess Jake's laughing over here. He can't keep it to himself. This is a good start of this episode. So a little bit about me. I guess I am finishing my PhD in philosophy at the University of Birmingham in the UK, though I don't residentially reside there. I'm in North Carolina in the Raleigh area. So if you've been to North Carolina, it's like sort of on the East Coast, hour and a half, 2 hours from the beach sort of area to situate your mind. I did my MDiv at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, where Jake Stone is at and where Garrett is also at. I did a THM at Southeastern Seminary in Wake Forest. I'm married and I have two children, both boys, and they both love playing with cars and trucks and everything related to that constantly. So that is a lot of fun. Other than that, I mean, I guess I helped co-found the London Lyceum, which I think is pretty much us and the Covenant Podcast are, I think, the true premier Reformed Baptist outlets that are out there. We're a little bit nerdy on the philosophical side oftentimes, which I think is a lot of fun. That's just sort of my training and sort of the itch I like to scratch. So I enjoy doing a lot of that sort of stuff. Other than that, I think that's pretty much it. I'll let Garrett go ahead and introduce himself.
Great. Yeah, my name is Garrett Walden, and I'm really honored to be on the podcast. It's been, I've listened to the podcast a few times, and it's been a really helpful podcast for me. And yeah, grateful to be part of it. Also grateful to be a part of the London Lyceum. It's been a wonderful time to connect with some like-minded friends. And so I'm a pastor down in Auburn, Alabama, and it's been a wonderful church here. I've been a pastor for coming up on 3 years now. And I live here in Auburn with my wife and my 4 kids. And so you might hear my children in the background at some point. But yeah, it's a sweet place to be. I did my undergrad here at Auburn. And so spent 2 years on campus at Southern working on an MDiv, and then finished back here at the church kind of remotely. And then stayed on and working on a PhD right now under the supervision of Dr. Michael Haykin. And my area of focus is specifically on 18th century Baptist history and theology. And so one of the things that I really like about Dr. Haykin's way of doing history is he really tries to highlight some of the lesser known voices. And so that's a big part of what my research entails, considering the life and ministry of a man, John Ryland. And so one of the interesting things about, John Gill is Gill and Ryland were close friends, and a lot of overlap of history and theology between the two of those men. At one point, I guess on some fronts, John Ryland just kind of copies and pastes from John Gill for a lot of his theology. Ryland takes some heat on a couple of different points, and his son John Ryland Jr. basically says that his father Ryland Sr. was pretty much in lockstep with Gill on specifically eschatology. So he's like, whatever Gill said about eschatology, just copy and paste that over to John Ryland Sr., and you pretty much got him. And so, as we kind of get into the John Gill project, it's a area that's really close to something that's really particular to what I do. And so, yeah, as a pastor, yeah, PhD student, got my family at home. It's been a sweet time. Grateful to be able to talk about the John Gill project.
Well, we're grateful to have you men on the Covenant podcast today. We've been immensely blessed by your work at the London Lyceum. And I know I speak for myself and for Austin when I say that we are thrilled to talk about the John Gill project today. In fact, I've actually having the pleasure of studying under Dr. Haykin and his cohort on John Gill with H&E Publishing. So I feel like I'm just drinking out of a fire hydrant for learning under him and being here today. So with that being said, since the topic of our conversation is the John Gill project for today's episode, would you guys be willing just to provide our listeners with an overview of who John Gill was and why he is such an important figure in Baptist history, especially for those who may not be as familiar with John Gill as some of you men are?
I'll kick the ball over to either Jake or Garrett as the resident historians of the group.
Yeah, I could put a big picture points, and then maybe Jake can supplement with all the good stuff. John Gill was a particular Baptist minister in England during the 18th century. So he was born in 1697. He dies in 1771. And so he is just an extraordinary figure. I guess my first interaction with John Gill came in Dr. Nettles' Baptist history class, History of the Baptist. And so that was the first time I ever heard of John Gill. And so he kind of jumps straight into Gill as kind of a bit of a controversialist, and some of the particular things about Gill that might be, I don't know, debated and misunderstood in Gill's history and theology. And so, but maybe at the biggest picture, some of the things that I think are most important about Gill is that he is the first Baptist theologian to write a full systematic theology, or what we would call a systematic theology, in his body of doctrinal divinity. And he has this kind of companion volume, a body of practical divinity, where he talks about different other aspects of the Christian life. So he's like the first great systematizer in Baptist history, period. And then on top of that, he writes a commentary on every verse and book of the Bible. He's the first Baptist to do that. And so just extraordinary Bible commentator. He was a Hebrew scholar. He was just a wonderful linguist. Has a lot of other kind of great areas of doctrinal emphasis as well. He was, I think maybe Richard Muller called him the last of the like the post-Reformation scholastics. So he kind of has this kind of old school, post-Reformation scholastic kind of method of theology, which makes him kind of unique among the particular Baptists. One other thing, kind of on the more ecclesiology side, he is the pastor of a church in London where Benjamin Keach was in the past, and after John Gill, he's followed by a man, John Rippon, who is another one of those kind of underrepresented voices who's really significant. John Rippon, in my view, is kind of like, I don't know, the Forrest Gump of the 18th century Baptists. He's like always at the right place when something really significant happens, and is like surprisingly well connected and networked, and just is interestingly involved in so many significant stories. So John Rippon follows Gill, and then after Rippon, kind of you get to Spurgeon. So you can think of maybe Gill as kind of the grandfather of Spurgeon's pastoral ministry there in London. So those are maybe just a few of the high points. If you look up pictures of Gill, he looks really grouchy. And I'd like to think of Gill as maybe not as grouchy, but maybe Jake can comment on, was Gill a big grouch or not?
Well, the story goes that one of the famous portraits of Gill hung in Spurgeon's office vestry, and somebody asked Spurgeon one time, why did Gill look so upset? And Spurgeon replied that he had just got finished talking with an Arminian, and that's why Gill looked like that. I do think that, well, if we're really being blunt about where Gill stands in the Baptist tradition, I think a lot of people have heard the mantra over and over and over that Gill is a hyper Calvinist and therefore Gill is to be avoided. And I think that's a real detriment in many ways to, Baptist theology over the last probably century. Uh, John Gill and Andrew Fuller are the two most influential Baptists before C.H. Spurgeon. I mean, when you come into the context of early Baptists in America, it's Gill and Fuller who are very influential among the development of pastors, North and South. And I think it's right to say that Gill is at least the titan among systematicians when we're thinking about who are the best, Baptist theologians. And there's much for us to recover. But Gill's like anybody that you study. There's things that you're going to read in him and you're like, I don't agree with this. I don't know, how he came there or whatever. But there's a lot of good that needs to be retrieved from him. And I think Dr. Haykin is correct in many ways when saying that Gill's influence and his personality, and really just the way that the Baptists of his day respected him, is why the particular Baptists were able to, for the most part, remain orthodox throughout the 18th century, especially as issues concerning the Trinity, the nature of Christ, deity, humanity, and so forth were rising up among dissenters. So I think we owe a huge debt to Gill, and I think that we would do well to really dig into the resources. And one thing too is that Gill is unique compared to a lot of the Baptists of that time, and that we have a lot of his writings. We can't really say that for many of those men in the 17th and 18th centuries, and even into the 19th century somewhat. So I think that as I've told people before, I think we learn much from Gill and Fuller. I think Fuller exhibits a lot better what we would call the evangelical Calvinism and maybe the pastoral model. But as far as systematically thinking through theology, I don't think there's anybody better than Gill in the Baptist tradition, even to this day.
Amen. I will go ahead and give us our fourth allusion to Dr. Michael Haykin. I know that the London Lyceum has done an episode on John Gill with Michael Haykin, so we'll link to the show notes in that. And then perhaps this next question will give us the fifth opportunity to talk about Michael Haykin as I ask, what is the John Gill Project and who will be cooperating together to administrate this project?
Yeah, so I guess broadly, the John Gill Project, it's with H&E Publishing and the Andrew Fuller Center for Baptist Studies. So H&E Publishing is with guys like Chance Faulkner, if you're familiar with him. H&E is doing awesome stuff, really trying to republish and do a lot of confessional Reformed sort of material. They are not some big, massive publisher that's just out to make money. They legitimately view it as a ministry to serve local churches and pastors. So I love them. I love what they're doing. And then the Andrew Fuller Center is headed up by Michael Haykin, of course. So Dr. Haykin, I mean, he's the premier scholar in Baptist history in my mind, especially confessional Baptist history, and trying to promote that in the life of the church today. So we've partnered with these three groups together and to form what is the John Gill Project. And essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to republish a significant amount of Gill's work into modern typesetting, into beautiful sort of volumes. So in my mind, essentially this is how it started. We realize there's a lot of great material out there in theology. You got Herman Bavinck, you can pull off your shelf, you can pull off Calvin off your shelf, and you start looking Turretin, and you're going down the list and you're thinking, where are the Baptists? I know we've got Baptists out here who have done great work, but where are they? They're not available. Well, I've got my great Baptist Standard Bearer set of, Gill, this massive one volume, the tiny little font. So if you've got that 2-volume set of Jonathan Edwards where it's got all of his works, it's just like, get my magnifying glass, pull it out so I can read it. And you're thinking, yes, some serious academics will buy that and read that, but your average everyday pastor or church member is not going to pull that off the shelf and read it, just because it's difficult to read and it's difficult to find on the internet. So I'm thinking here, what if we republished some of Gill? So I just email Dr. Haykin a chance at H&E and say, what do you think about this idea? And it just took off from there. And so now the goal right now, the first installment of the project is we're going to publish an edited and abridged version of Gill's entire body of divinity and body of practical divinity. That's set to come out in January of this year. So this is a sprint to get this one done, but that's not the only one done. So that'll be the initial volume that's like, here, let's take some snippets from all of Gill's thought and get it in the hands of local churches and local church members who are not likely to read 4,000 pages of text. We do have plans to have a fully 3-volume unabridged set as well, in that you can sit next to your Turretin on your shelf and you can pull off for references. But we wanted this volume out first to serve local churches and pastors immediately. But we also have plans to republish a whole range of his work. And this is going to include new introductions from Dr. Haykin, as well as Dr. Jonathan Swan, who Dr. Haykin looks at Jonathan Swan as the premier Gill expert that's there. So he was one of his PhD students, and he's brilliant. So I'm excited about the project. I think we also at the London Lyceum, we've got an annual journal that we've started. The first issue on the liberty of conscience should come out sometime this summer. I'm busy working through the initial stages of copy editing with the articles that have come in. I'm excited about it. But our second issue is dedicated to John Gill. So I'm pumped about this. Jonathan Swan and David Rathel will be guest editing that as well. So they'll be offering their Gill expertise to make sure that the articles are awesome. So I'm pumped about all that we're doing with the Gill project. At bottom, we just want more Baptist resources in the hands of our churches. And we think our seminaries need it too. I mean, I went to seminary. I don't have any Reformed confessional, I don't even have any Baptist in my systematic theology classes. I mean, you've got John Frame. I guess maybe what is Wayne Grudem? I don't know. Is he like pseudo Baptist-ish? I don't want to get in that hot water. I'll sidestep that one. And then you got Herman Bavinck. I mean, you don't have John Gill is the premier Baptist. Why don't we have our premier systematic theologian available for our seminaries? So that is the whole heartbeat behind it. We want to republish it for a modern generation, make it available, make it readable, make it available we'll do small tracks. So there's portions of his spirituality that you can put in 50 or less pages and you can hand to a church member and say, let's do a study on this. That's easy, comprehensible. Then you got let's do the full 3-volume unabridged set that your nerdy pastors and your nerdy academics want to get your hands on. So we're going to try to do a range of everything, but I'm pumped about it. We've got plans for at least 20 volumes. So it's really exciting. I don't know, Garrett, Jake, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so one of the things for me, I hope that this isn't like moving us to a different part of the conversation, but I'm sure many of us in this conversation have relative easy access to Baptist sources. So if you like, Jake's talking about Andrew Fuller, he's like dropping an Andrew Fuller quote in his sermon from last night or whatever. Those sorts of things, we pretty much know where to go to find that. Thankfully, Fuller has been, I guess, modernized and more and popularized a little bit more. I just remember talking with church members who basically are asking questions about different theological topics, and when I think about what books I can recommend to them or what sources I can recommend to them, like Jordan mentioned, there's a lot of great Presbyterian and I guess like Puritan sources, which are fantastic, not to denigrate those at all. But when you think about why it is that it's so easy to recommend, I don't know, John Flavel or Richard Sibbs or something like that, is because mostly the work of Banner of Truth, if we're going to be honest about it, mostly the work of Banner of Truth. And so here's H&E, they're doing their thing, and I would love to see H&E kind of develop into like the Confessional Baptist Banner of Truth kind of thing. And so this is kind of the big project in my mind of how to kind of get started in that. So another kind of angle on that is when you put, Richard Sibbs, you put Herman Bavinck into people's hands, a wonderful thing. You can probably hear my children playing in the background. I'm sure you're tired of your friends abandoning the Baptist tradition. As I want them to read Bavinck, but I want them to stay Baptist. And so I'm just really grateful that I'm about to be able to like say, here is a Baptist systematician that, you don't have to just, kick out his ecclesiology and his section on baptism or whatever. This is a true Baptist source that's going to be good for you and that we can trust. It's part of our tradition as confessional Baptists.
Well, I think that Jordan and Garrett were anticipating where we were going with our next question, because we really appreciated their insights on the need for Baptist republishing and recovering books from our specific theological tradition. I know over the first few years of me going to Bible college at the Master's University, I was notified that if you're going to adhere to covenant theology, you need to be a Presbyterian. I've even heard from notable Baptist seminary professors and presidents, not to name drop here to avoid hot water, so to speak, as Jordan mentioned earlier, but was told that if you're going to adhere to the doctrines of grace, then that's not something that Baptists do. That's something that Presbyterians believe. So I can speak from firsthand experience, just from what I've heard as a young Bible college student, and even over the past few years, just from what you see on social media here on YouTube and things of that nature, that there's still a misnomer going around that, if you're going to believe in covenant theology, if you're going to believe in the doctrines of grace, if you're going to read rich, systematic theological volumes, then you're probably going to cross over into Presbyterianism, and you're going to leave Baptistic roots. So I just want to see if you guys might be able to speak on a few more important reasons for Baptists just retrieving the works that have been written and developed in generations past, because I think this is a very important issue and concern for many of our listeners today, because I don't know about y'all, but I get tired of seeing Scott Clark sharing all the Baptists that leave their denomination and go and join some of the Presbyterian varieties out there. So if you guys want to speak about just the importance or the most significant reasons for Baptists publishing works from previous generations, I think that would be really useful to park at for a few moments here in our conversation.
I think
Yeah, well, I
Jake
want
might
to be
start running laps.
restrained. Yeah, well, I want to be restrained in my comments. The problem is we started apologizing for being Baptist. That's the story. We began I think people had good intentions of trying to move into, we're evangelicals and we have this in common and that in common. And that's true. We do want to promote a lower C Catholic spirit, but we're Baptists for a reason. And if you don't expound on that, and I would say that Baptist theology and Baptist identity is very much, welded together with Baptist history. Really, those two things you've got to be able to do together to understand where our distinctives and who we are come from. It didn't just, magically appear somewhere. There's real roots and fruit that have come that we need to understand. And what happened, if you go back, and I'll say this, if you go back to, Southern Baptist publishing over 100 years ago, the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was very common for the Sunday School Board and those things to continuously publish works on Baptist identity, Baptist distinctives. We had, church manuals. And as the 20th century progressed, those things got thrown out because it wasn't important. Pragmatism was the name of the game. The old preacher would say it was about, nickels and noses, and that's all that matters. And so we have suffered in Baptist life. We've not done very well in publishing because we've been too consumed with other things. And the things that we did publish, let's just say, never needed to be published in the first place. So now we have a really good opportunity to retrieve. And there's a lot for us to learn from. What fascinates me is why we think that we can't learn from these men in the past is almost as if, well, we can't understand those kinds of things. Men like Fuller and so forth, and even to an extent with Gill, these men were self taught in a lot of ways. They didn't have the great formal educations because they were dissenters. They didn't have access to that. And yet they were very studious. They knew history, they knew theology, they knew the languages, and also they did it not in a vacuum. They did it as a community. They did it with other Baptist pastors and associations and so forth. So if we want to understand who we are, we've got to read these men. And then this will be the last thing that I say, because I don't want to get on my soapbox this morning. But if we're going to understand religious liberty, liberty of conscience, the church and the state, and all those kinds of things, and how do we exist faithfully as a minority group in this context, then there's no people better to learn from than our Baptist forefathers. And I fear sometimes that too many guys who would put themselves, and I'll put it in quotes here, in the Baptist community, they're more interested in a political theology that's going to keep or gain some kind of power. And that's a losing strategy overall, because when that's what you're motivated by is keeping some kind of power culturally or politically, then you're going to compromise on what you believe. And more, you don't sound like a Baptist, you sound like something else. And that's why we need to go back to the sources and read and understand those men. It doesn't mean that we're saying, let the society go to hell, but it does mean that we understand there is a kingdom of man and a kingdom of God. We have to understand where the church fits in, and that we're not called to go storm the castle, so to speak, and to raise the Baptist standard. Look, I wish everybody was a Baptist in the United States of America. I do, but that's not the goal. And I'm not, naive enough to think that. Now, if I were post-millennial, maybe that would be what I think is the end. But what I do believe is those men believed in strong churches, strong families, strong association of churches. And they did it by holding fast to the faith that was delivered, by not apologizing for being Baptist, and even being willing to go to jail and to suffer for what they believed. So we can talk about how big we are and all that in our day, but until we're at that point, I think that a lot of us would do well maybe to be in silence and to read and learn from these men about how do we stand faithfully as a remnant group. Other than that, I don't have any opinions about why we should do Baptist publishing and retrieval.
That's great, Jake. And one of the things you said is, the history and the theology do go together in some significant ways. And one of the things, looking around again, just us in this conversation, we've had the privilege of theological education in a formal way, and so I was just thinking, times where I have had church members or friends ask me about something from Baptist history. I have access through our library, through the school library, to a database called ECHO, 18th Century Collections Online, where it's literally hundreds of thousands of primary source documents scanned in through like libraries and archives and museums and stuff like that. And so, but for someone who doesn't have access to that library, that database, I think it costs the library, I don't know, tens of thousands of dollars to have access for students, and people can't just do that. So I think we have a stewardship as those who have received a formal theological education to kind of mediate some of these old Baptist voices to the church today. And that's what I see the John Gill Project doing is here's some guys who have the privilege of access to these materials. And we're trying to basically serve as like a mediating voice from the church of the past to the church of the present, and hopefully for the benefit of the church of the future. And I really think that's a really wonderful thing. And it's a really sweet stewardship to kind of pass down this rich Baptist literature.
Yeah, that's good, Garrett. I mean, I think you got to think about this. Like, what has been most influential in the history of the church? Well, a lot of it has to do with just what's made available to people. If something's not available, it could be the best resource on the planet and it's not going to edify people. So that's why we have to republish these sort of things. I mean, I think Herman Bavinck, he's probably my favorite systematician that I have access to. I had no idea who he was 10 years ago. Didn't know he existed. And I wouldn't have had access to his stuff 10 to 15 years ago because it was untranslated over in Dutch. unless we republish this sort of work for people and make it available to them, especially at an affordable price, which one reason why I like H&E is they're not going to set the price at an academic $150 per volume. You're going to actually be able to afford to purchase the volume and purchase it for your church in bulk if you want to. That's how we make good resources like this get into this life stream and the lifeblood of our churches, is making it available. And the biggest part of that is just republishing it so people can have access to it.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that. I can sense the excitement in all of your guys' answer and being a part of this project. And perhaps other people are also excited. I know I myself am excited, and I want to participate, and maybe some of our listeners would want to participate in this project. Um, I would imagine doing something like this costs money. So I'm curious to ask you, brothers, how can people participate in this project? What are your fundraising goals for the John Gill project, and where can people contribute to giving to this project?
That's a great question. So I'm going to explain a little bit about this because I think even like myself, I had no idea how much all creating books costs. A lot of this stuff is just kind of like mysteriously behind the curtain. So first off, big publishers are not super interested in publishing John Gill, for better or for worse. Most big publishers, it's primarily about the bottom line. For better or for worse, that's not always a bad thing. You got to keep the doors open. I get it, but when they see John Gill, they're not going to be like, "Wow, this is really going to turn a profit" or something like that. So big publishers are the ones that have money to spend on these sort of things and can pay the upfront cost to create resources like this. A small publisher like H&E does not have a vault with $2 million sitting in it where they can actually afford to front the cost on these sort of things. So to create a book like this, it costs money to get it copy edited by a professional. It costs money to get the layout design. It costs money to actually get it printed and put into an actual volume. And all of that for a volume like the first volume we're doing is going to cost somewhere between $4,000 to $5,000 up front before we see a penny of anything coming, before anyone buys anything. We've invested $4,000 to $5,000 in to just create it and make it a reality. So that is the initial goal. Is if we want to make these sort of things a reality, we need money to make it happen. We need to resource and fund the project. So we've set an entire goal of 40,000 so that we can do 20 to 25 volumes. Now, the first initial volume is going to be in that $4,000 to $5,000 range, and I anticipate in that next year phase, so by the end of 2023, we would need about 15,000 to maybe 20,000 to front the initial 10 or so volumes that we hope to have out in that time frame. So the way to contribute to the project is there's sort of two locations you can go. You can go to the London Lyceum's website. You can go to londonlyceum.com. There's a tab that says resources, and if you hover over that, there's another little option that says the John Gill Project. You can click that. You scroll to the bottom, and there's a like a little box where you can donate. You can click it in, fill in your info there. You can do it that way, or if you want, you can go to the actual source. The funding source that we're using is called DonorBox, and it's all it is. It's just donorbox.org/ the John Gill Project. Now there's a dash between each of those words, so it's like the dash John dash Gill dash project. But if you go there, you can donate directly to there. It's got all the information on both our website, and this has got the information on what the project is, why we think it's important, what our goals are, how much we need to make it a reality, as well as if you donate $100, we'll make sure you get a copy of that initial volume. If you donate $1,000, we'll make sure you get a copy of the full set of 20 or 25 volumes that we hope to do. If you can help fund the project and support it. So one thing I do recommend, maybe you don't have a lot of money in your pocket. You're like, I don't have $1,000 to give, but well, a lot of your local churches do. And we view this as a mission to equip gospel ministers, gospel pastors to do good theology, to preach good sermons, to shepherd their flock well. We think this is going to help that area. So we think of this as a mission project in some ways. So if you can talk to your church, I've got a support letter that I can send you. If you need a support letter, you can email contact@thelondonlyceum.com. It'll be on official letterhead. You'll have Michael Haykin's name there at the bottom. so that you know it's legit. I mean, you've got everything in here. We can provide you to convince your church to say this is something we should support, because it's going to benefit not only our church, but it's going to benefit all the local churches around us to have great orthodox, classically orthodox resources like Gill in your hands and made available. I don't know, Jake, Garrett, do you have any other words of advice? Okay, well, I must have nailed it. So I tell you, go talk to your church. If you need the letter, I can give it to you, or you can just give them the website and go say, I believe in this project. I think Gill's necessary. I think he's needed. I mean, if you know Haykin, if Haykin thinks he's needed, then he's definitely needed. So go talk to your churches and say, can we support this? If it's $10, it's $10. That helps support it. If it's $50, it's $50. I don't care how much you're able to support, but supporting in any way that you can will make this project a reality, and we'll get good, classically orthodox resources in the hands of our churches and our church members. So I think it's a great project, and I really do recommend and urge you to support it. And we don't make any money from this. So just to be clear, I don't see a penny. Me, Jake, Garrett, all the guys, we're doing a bunch of transcription work. We're staying up late, doing all the work to make it a reality. We will see $0 from this. Not a single penny will go into our pockets. So just in case you wondered, there's no Big Eva pockets here. It's no profit.
Well, we are certainly grateful for the labors of men like you to put the writings of John Gill in the hands of pastors and church members all throughout our country and hopefully all throughout the world at an affordable price. So we just want to encourage our listeners to contribute to this project in any way that you are able to do so. And we hope that the Lord will richly bless your efforts in the future months and years of seeing this project to its fruition. Just as we prepare to wrap up our discussion today, do any of you have any final insights pertaining to either John Gill or to the John Gill project as a whole that you feel led to share with our listeners?
Yeah, if I might just jump in there, one kind of reflection I continue to come back to is just a thought that was shared with me, that if Baptists don't define our own theology, and if we don't recover our own history, then no one's going to do it. Or the people that do it are going to do it badly. They're going to do a bad job of it, and they're going to misdefine it, and they're going to do a poor job of articulating our history. And so I'm going to assume that most of your listener audience is going to be kind of in our vein of confessional Baptists, and what a wonderful thing. And so dig in there for yourself. Read the primary sources yourself. And I think that's such an important step for Baptist lay people, as well as pastors, as well as scholars, is to go back to the primary sources. Read it yourself so that you can be able to say, I know my own theology. I know what my tradition stands for, where we came from. And I just really think we need to be looking at this with our own eyes and seeing it for ourselves, so we can articulate our own theology and history. So I think this is one step toward that direction.
We have a really great opportunity, and we need to be good stewards of the opportunity that has been given to us. As we noted earlier, there were a lot of men, that I think about, for example, the work that both the Renahans have done in really being able to get resources to us. And they will concede that, for example, the work that was done on Nehemiah Cox, republishing his work on the covenants, that was not something that was available 30 years ago for people to get, and really 20 years ago. And so the Lord is really, in our age with technology, given us the ability to be able to do these things. And I'm a little mad at Garrett because he said everything that I was going to say in my closing speech. So I don't have it now, but great minds think alike. But just to say that, this is a cause worth giving to. The work that H&E is doing, we as Baptists, we need to do a good job of investing, not just in this present moment, but for the future. And projects like this are to equip not just our generation, but the generations to come. And so it's exciting to be a part of this. And I hope that it's just one of many that will come, not just on someone like Gill. There's a lot of Baptists for us to retrieve, recover, and republish.
Yeah, that's good. I might whet your appetite. Dr. Haykin knows about a set of sermons that has never been published, never really been seen, that we hope to get our hands on, and we'll have to actually look through his handwriting and transcribe it. But it's located just like 45 minutes from me, so I have easy access to go find them and get them into the hands of you listeners and readers and eager readers. So I think, I mean, the project, like Jake said, I think it's just a start. Garrett has mentioned throughout that Baptists, we just haven't had a lot of resources, and we really want to make them get them in the hands of our Baptist people. And there's so many Baptists yet to be brought into the fold and say, this is a great resource. We should engage him. And remember, you don't have to agree with Gill on everything to find value in him. I don't agree with all sorts of people on my shelf on things like ecclesiology, and yet I still find them extremely fruitful and beneficial for my life and for my own personal development and for my own teaching others. So I think Gill is a great person to retrieve from. I mean, I'm a little biased because I'm kind of nerdy. Like, some of my academic interests are in things like classical theism, and he's a great example of someone who is promoting that, championing that, defending that. And so I think if Baptists want to understand how have Baptists thought about the nature of God and things like that, you go to Gill, and he's very clear and very methodical, and he's very he's scholastic in method. So Garrett mentioned he's kind of like one of the last sort of Protestant scholastics in some ways. So I always find that approach really nice. So when you read Gill, you can go, he's going to give you 5 or 6 just arguments. Here's 6 reasons this is true. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And here's the objections. Let me walk through the objections and explain why they don't ultimately obtain. I find that sort of method really easy to understand and follow. So if you want to know those sort of things, I highly recommend Gill. I think it's fantastic. I think it's going to be a great project, and I'm pumped about it.
Amen. Well, we are very much pumped here at the Covenant Podcast, and we have enjoyed just a wonderful conversation on the subject of John Gill and the forthcoming production of the John Gill Project. We're so grateful for you men joining us today. And for our listeners, we just want to encourage you to stay up to date with the development of this project. If you feel led to do so, feel free to contribute financially and certainly be offering your prayers for a successful development of this project in the future. I think it's going to be very useful in getting people better acquainted with the life and theology of John Gill, hopefully for years to come. So we appreciate you men joining us today on the Covenant Podcast. And to our listeners, until next time, we want to wish you grace and peace. God bless.
For additional content, check out our blog ministry at covenantconfessions.com. Also, keep up with our social media accounts on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Next, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. Lastly, thank you for listening to the Covenant Podcast. Grace and peace to you.